Okay, we said before in the last video that if we wanted to create some graphs to kind of illustrate what our data is showing. I think the first graph that would be good to show is how did the beer tax change over time? So I think having the year on the x-axis and beer tax on the vertical axis would be a good graph to show. Maybe when you think about your paper, think about what type of graphs would do a good job of illustrating the questions that you're asking here. So let's create this graph. Right, so this is our time graph is what I'm going to name this chunk here. Note that as I type that in there, right, it creates chunk 5 time graph down here in this, right? It's kind of good to name your chunks of code. Okay, so we want to just start with our data here, and we're just going to pipe that code into ggplot. We need to set our aesthetics, right? We said that X, we want that to be equal to the year. We want our Y to equal the beer tax. We want to look at each state differently. So let's give each state a different color. I'm going to put state, and then let's put plus geom line. And if we run this, let's see here, it looks completely worthless. It says each group consists of only one observation. You need to adjust the group aesthetic. Okay, each group only. What went wrong there? Remember before we talked about how the year was not really, it was a factor, not a number, where here we want it to treat the years like they are numbers. So we need to change that. We need to do what we did in the previous thing of mutate the year so that it is a number. So I'm just going to copy and paste. Let me find that line from up here. Let's just take this line here, copy and paste that line. Mutate this. Let's see how this looks now. There we go. Okay, so let's see what this looks like in our, once we've knitted it all together. Let's see if it's in here now. Okay, there's our graph. It'd be good to like improve these axis titles so that they're capitalized correctly, have spacing in them. Give this a nice title. That'd be worthwhile to continue mess with this to make it prettier. Notice that most of these states have a slight downward trend in the beer tax, but not much variation. We see some states here that do have a bit of variation, but there's not much variation, right? And so without much variation, remember that variation in the X value is something that helps bring the standard errors down. So without much variation, it's going to be difficult to find the effect of a beer tax. So looking at this, I am currently a bit surprised that they found an effect on beer tax. Not because I don't think beer taxes don't affect fatalities, but there just isn't much variation in the beer tax here for them to find out if it works or not. So that makes me, right, I'm getting a bit suspicious about the results here if they really did find an effect, because I don't expect them to find effect, not because I don't expect beer taxes to work, but there's just so little variation here for them to analyze on. I'm going to leave this graph again. I would recommend that you continue to clean this up. And you notice I've been leaving these code boxes in here. For a nice paper, usually you don't really want the code boxes in there. So what you could do is to go back here and make one of the options echo equals false. So if I put that in there and then we again re-net it, what that's saying is don't echo the code, don't tell the code in the paper. So here we have again our graph, but now that box of code that was in there before is no longer there, right? So if you don't want to show the code, you can use that echo equals false to hide the code. I think looking at a graph of the extent to which the beer tax is correlated with the fatality rate might again help give us some answers on that. So that I think is another good graph where we have beer tax on the x-axis and the fatality rate on the y-axis. So let's again create a new one. Again, start with our fatalities thing here. And let's pipe this in, get our year corrected as we did before. And then we want to do our ggplot. We need to set our aesthetics. In this time, we want to have our x-axis be the beer tax. The y-axis to be the fatality rate, which is just called rate. We still want states organized by color. I think we probably want this as a point, right? Geom point. Is that? Hopefully, I'm doing that correctly. Not what I do. That I knew there's something wrong. E before the O there. Geom point. Okay, and we got our graph here. Let's just go ahead and knit that together. Great. So this is telling you those that have a high beer tax rate, they all seem to have very similar rates of fatalities. Those that don't have beer taxes either tend to have very low fatality rates or very high fatality rates. From this, let me see if this shows up in our, yep, so here's the graph in the paper. All right, from this, it's again kind of hard to see if there is much effect. We can see a couple states here, whatever this gray state is here, right? There seems to be, as the beer tax is going up, the fatality rate's going down. Again, here in this purple state, as the beer tax is going up a little bit, we're seeing a decrease in the fatality rate. So maybe there is an effect there. I don't know, we're gonna have to use our regressions to figure that out. Anyway, so now we have two nice tables. They could use a little bit of cleaning up still on this one, making the titles look nice. And two graphs, again, they could get cleaned up on their axis titles and be given a titles. But this is very nice for the data section of tables and graphs. So I think the data section is done. And so next is going to be time to start moving on to running some regressions.